What's going on, man? How's your week been?
I have been real good. My wife just left on vacation. She's going to her 30-year middle school reunion.
Middle school reunion? I don't think I've ever been to a school reunion at all, but let alone middle school.
Well, in China, it's really weird. They have so up until middle school, the kids are all pretty much together, and then they kind of start branching off into their specialized schools. And China's like, it's not like here. You just go to the high school that's closest to you or in your neighborhood, or in your district. Over there, they go to high school based on their grades from middle school. So they've got high schools for the smarter kids, high schools for the low achievers, and so on.
I feel like I would have been in that low achiever school.
Well, that's what my wife said. She said we were talking about it the other day, and she was like, man, all my friends from middle school, they were like low achievers. They went to the bad high schools, the quote unquote bad high schools, and all of them are successful today.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't do very well in school. I wonder if that's a thing for small business guys and entrepreneurs, if a lot of them didn't do so hot.
Maybe it's one of those things where it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Because if you're a low achiever and then you don't go to college, for example, then you're kind of forced into something, right? So you're either forced into a path of so-called servitude or a path of entrepreneurship.
Yeah. Fair enough. Well, this week's been kind of tough for me. We're dealing with extension deadlines. I'm dealing with some hardcore burnout. I did not want to be here today. I mean, this is fun. I'm happy to do the podcast, but I do not want to sit in my office anymore. The weather's nice. I should be playing golf.
Is there any possibility to get like temporary help?
It's not that I actually need the help. I don't have so much work that I can't handle it. It's just I'm procrastinating and I don't want to do it.
Well, cocaine's a time-honored
Is that? I guess that's how they got it done in the 80s. Yeah. Is that what I should be doing?
I read a thing in Reason magazine probably 20 years ago or so that the essay or the article postulated that a majority of the world's great discoveries and inventions were probably fueled by drugs.
Yeah, I bet that's correct.
There was
see some new designs on an acid trip or something.
Yeah, well, there was a part of the story, as I remember it, was that there was a famous mathematician that was open about using stimulants, like Adderall or something like that, or maybe it was heroin. I don't even know what it was, but it was something hardcore.
Yeah,
and whenever he would have his discussions with his colleagues about it, he would say, "Yeah, I think better. I think more clearly." And his colleagues made a bet with him, and he said, "You're just addicted." He said, "I'll bet you that you can't quit that drug for a month, right?" And the other guy accepted the bet, quit the drug for a month, and then his friend says, "Okay, how do you feel?" And he says, "I feel like shit, and mathematics has been set back by a month."
Well, there you go. I don't think Turtlesmith is condoning drug use, but
we're not condoning drug use.
Maybe if you're a crazy mathematician, it's
we're not also we're not going to be like the turtle that keeps its head in the shell and doesn't acknowledge that it is part of life. So
fair enough.
Well,
this week we're talking about employment, which is the next phase or the next step in phase 2 of your kind of how to start a business that we're doing. And it's all about understanding kind of just general employment terms and kind of understanding how it all works. So the first thing we'll talk about is employees versus independent contractors. And that is a big hot button issue right now, particularly with the IRS. They're cracking down hard on people who are, on small businesses who are paying as independent contractors when really you should be paying them as employees. And the reason that some small businesses choose to try to get everybody on independent contractor is it does save in payroll taxes. You don't have to do the matching FICA taxes. You don't have to pay unemployment taxes. So it's possible, depending on what state you are and what the unemployment rules are, it can save you anywhere from about 7.5% to 10% in taxes. But if you falsely pay somebody 1099 or independent contractor when they're supposed to be an employee, you can get in a lot of trouble, a lot of penalties, a lot of interest, and it really is a bad deal. So
it's also detrimental to the employee because a lot of times you'll negotiate an amount with somebody and try to pay them as a contractor, and that person will not be aware that they need to file taxes.
Correct. Yeah,
And-
it costs them more taxes too because
Yeah.
they have to pay all that self-employment tax. So,
Right.
yeah, real hassle. The IRS defines kind of 3 different categories to determine whether people are employees versus an independent contractor. The first is behavioral. Does the company control or have the right to control what the worker does or how the worker does his job? So if you have somebody that needs to show up from 9 to 5, you're telling them what to do, or they perform a function that is controlled by you, that's an employee. If they're working on their own, they show up on their own time, they work by the job, you kind of just have them do piecemeal work, or they get paid for everything that they finish, that's more of an independent contractor. The next one's financial, and that is the business aspects for the worker's job controlled by the payer, which basically just means, are you giving them all of the necessary tools and supplies as the employer, or do they bring their own? So subcontractors that come out and work on your house, they bring all their own tools, they'll often bring all the supplies. That's an independent contractor. Somebody who you're providing computer, software, everything that they need to do their job, that would be an employee.
But that doesn't always mean it, right? Like, you can have your computer, for example, and a bookkeeper shows up and does your books.
Correct. But that's exactly right. So these, you kind of have to really judge all of these factors to determine whether they're going to be an independent contractor or an employee. The last one is sort of the type of relationship, written contract. Do they have benefits with you? Are they short-term versus long-term? These are kind of categories to define employees versus independent contractors. But really what it comes down to is the amount of control that you have over the worker. If you have a lot of control over what they do, how they do it, when they do it, then that's an employee. If you don't have so much control, it's just you got to get this job done and they kind of do it on their own, that is an independent contractor.
Now, I think a lot of small business owners probably don't even really realize the difference here.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens if someone hires someone as an independent contractor, and then at some point they realize, hey, I really need to have this person on the payroll. I need to have a payroll.
Well, if you as the employer realize that you made a mistake and that you really need to be paying as an employee rather than a contractor, you should really get with an accountant at that point, because you're kind of in some deep water already. They'll be able to help you out. Find a tax professional or a CPA or whoever in your local area, and they can kind of sort it all out for you.
So can a person hire someone as an independent contractor and then turn them into an employee?
That's often happens. If you have somebody kind of on a short-term contract, they're doing something very specific, they're getting paid like per the job, you end up liking them and you want to bring them on full-time. That switch happens from time to time, yeah.
Now, what happens when you hire a temp agency or someone from a temp agency?
So that's a completely different thing. That's called an employee leasing company. The temp agency actually pays the worker. You pay the temp agency, so it's completely out of your hands.
So the tax situation is taken care of.
Mm-hmm.
That's all legal. You don't
Yeah.
have to worry about it. But that is a situation where you can hire someone as a sort of an independent contractor, where you don't have to put them on the payroll, but you could dictate to them that they have to be there from 9 to 5.
Yeah. Now, if you need seasonal help or just part-time help, or like you don't necessarily need help every day, like maybe once a week you need somebody to come in, a staffing agency or an employee leasing company, great option for
Is this mostly a thing for the IRS, that they just really care about that people are classified correctly and the correct taxes are paid?
Correct. They want to make sure that the employee is having the correct taxes withheld from their paycheck, and that the employer is paying their share, which we'll get into that a little later, kind of what the different taxes are for an employee. But they just want to get paid, the IRS does. And so if everything's working out, you probably won't ever hear from them. But the second something doesn't get paid, or one of your employees doesn't pay their taxes, then you can get in some trouble. Now, you can't get in trouble for the employee not paying their taxes, but if they feel that they were an employee, so if you're an employee and you're getting 1099 or independent contractor, and you feel that that's a mistake, you can file the form SS8 with the IRS, and that's a reclassification of your work status. It reclassifies you from an independent contractor to an employee. And then if you, as a company owner, if one of your workers does this and the IRS agrees with them, that's a big issue. That's a bankruptable event for small businesses.
Really?
Yeah, it's horrible. You have to pay all of the taxes for that employee, so you have to catch them up on the full FICA taxes. You have to basically take what they were paid and round up all of the taxes that they were to pay, and you have to just pay out of pocket for everything.
Like 100% of it, or is it half?
100% of it.
So the fine, it's basically a penalty of 100%.
And then there's interest and penalties for not filing the 941s and all the tax forms and paying the taxes. We've seen it happen a couple times. I think we've had 3 companies in the last about 4 or 5 years who've had a situation like this. 2 went out of business very quickly.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
That's
So
heavy.
if you have an employee, pay them as an employee. Don't try to cheat and pay them as a contract laborer. You're going to be much better in the long run.
Well, that's one of the heaviest penalties that I think we've discussed about not doing things the right way.
That's a real bad one. Yeah, you want to make sure that if you have an employee and they're classified as an employee, that you're paying them properly.
All right. So when I was in Germany, we had a saying that's called "Don't save on the wrong end."
Yeah.
This would be an example of trying to save on the wrong end that can really hit you heavily on the back end.
Yeah, and it doesn't even save you that much. It does save a little bit, but it's not like a huge amount that really everybody should be trying to cheat. This is, if they're employees, just pay them like an employee. That's all there is to it.
Yeah.
So the next thing we're going to talk about is sort of hourly versus salary and what the difference is, and also some of the new overtime rules. So hourly person, it's pretty simple. Everybody's worked a job probably that's listening. You just get paid X amount of dollars per hour. A salaried employee gets a total compensation for the week, regardless of how many hours they work. That's kind of how it's supposed to be. But there's 2 sort of rules for salaried people, or 1 rule for salaried people and then 1 rule for hourly that you kind of have to pay attention to. The hourly rule is, the new overtime rule is anything over 40 hours in a week, you have to pay overtime. So it used to be kind of by the pay period is how a lot of people used to do it. Now it's by the week. So if I work 42 hours one week and 38 the next week, that's 80 on my 2-week paycheck.
But 2 hours of overtime.
I get 2 hours of overtime now.
Ooh,
and
that's a big difference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and a lot of times people would just pay, based on the total hours, however many days in the pay period times 8, and then you would judge whether they had overtime that way. The salary rule is you have to pay attention to what's called the white collar exemption limit. If you try to pay somebody salary under this exemption limit, they still are entitled to overtime. So I think it's like 55 or maybe 57,000. We'll put the right number up on the website for sure, but it changes every year. It goes up a little bit, but if you pay under that amount, like say you pay $40,000 a year in salary, if somebody works overtime, they still get overtime at their general hourly rate.
But if they make over 57,000 or whatever the number actually is, then it means they can work 160 hours a month and not get overtime?
Correct. Yeah, well, however many, 40 hours a week, 45, 50 hours a week, you don't have to pay them overtime. So those are kind of the rules versus the hourly and salary that you need to pay attention to. So then a lot of employers offer benefits. Most small businesses are not required to offer anything. Health insurance you're supposed to offer if you have more than 50 employees. You have to have some kind of qualified health plan. But and then the other benefits are 401k and vision and dental, pensions, things like that. For a small business, benefits are really just about keeping good employees. So depending on what kind of business you're running, you probably don't have to worry about benefits, especially at the beginning. But as you kind of grow and get more employees, having benefits retains your employees. Having a great health plan or health insurance plan really keeps a lot of your great employees with you because they don't want to have to pay for insurance or jump ship.
Back in phase 1, when we were talking about planning, and especially as we got into the financials, I don't recall that we really talked too much about the cost of these things.
No, we did not. And so during phase 2, you should probably go back to phase 1 and retool your business plan if you want to offer these things. But mostly for a small business just starting out, they don't need to worry about this. This is more for as you're starting to grow and scale, you need to pay attention to these type of deals.
But I'm going to kind of push back on that a little bit. I kind of think that it's worth it to put that in as a conservative estimate and see if you can be competitive if you paid benefits. You might opt not to pay benefits, so that would then just be a profit center, if you were able to, but you didn't. But if you were able to, then you definitely could, and you wouldn't have to worry about it severely affecting your ability to stay in business.
The majority of small businesses, under 5 employees, do not have any benefits. And for example, my company only very recently had health insurance. For the first 4 or 5 years I was in business, I didn't even have health insurance. I tried to get on some marketplace stuff. I was on for a little while and then would get kicked off. And it's just it's tough to keep benefits early. And so it's my opinion that if you're starting a business, that the thought process on your benefits is really a down the road type of deal. Once you start getting steady, you have income, you have revenue, that's when you pay attention to those kind of things. Unless you're some type of professional organization. If you're starting a law firm, typically you have to have benefits to get great employees.
Yeah, all I meant was just, throw it in the calculations and see where you're at.
Yeah, 100%. So again, you don't have to offer anything if you don't want to. You're not required unless you have a certain number of employees for health insurance. But they are a great way to keep, people on your team. So for a long time. The next thing we'll talk about is kind of raises. Now it's been proven by several studies that if you jump jobs every 2 to 3 years as an employee, you will end up with a much higher salary than if you stayed at one job for a long time. So typically when you jump ship, there's a pretty decent increase in your salary. A lot of times you'll hear people getting 15 or 20% raises when they switch companies. A typical business will only give, 5-7% raises a year. And so it doesn't work out very well as an employee if you try to stay with the company for a long time, particularly because we have seen a reduction in pensions and things like that going away.
So this is kind of on a tangent, but has anybody done any studies about how much raises contribute to inflation, for example? Because that seems to me to be a point where companies would have to raise their prices as they're paying more. If they're being more competitive, and if you're jumping ship and you're going to a competitor but doing the same job, then presumably that competitor can afford to pay whatever ends up being the increased compensation.
I suppose.
So they would have to charge accordingly, possibly, unless they have, some much lower cost in some way to offset it, right? So in order to stay competitive, then a company would need to either offer raises or be looking for employees that they're going to offer more money to, right?
I mean, if you want to keep your key employees, you're going to have to offer really competitive raises. So I typically do 10% a year roughly, and that seems to keep everybody happy right now. But I know for a fact that, the attorney that works for me, she could go work somewhere else for probably a 50% raise if she really wanted to. But I offer her benefits in other ways, lots of days off and things like that. So it's a little bit better of a working environment for her. That's why she sticks around. But if I was on, when we have quite a few employees as we grow this business and we're hiring more people, we're going to have to be real competitive in raises. Otherwise, we'll just have people leaving. They'll come here, they'll get a bunch of training, they'll get a bunch of experience, and then they'll take it somewhere else.
So that would have to be part of our, business planning then, right? We would have to have some sort of a plan for increasing our revenue year on year.
Well, revenue should increase, as should your profit margins, as you're building your business, but you have to take into account some of those raises as you're doing your kind of year-to-year projections and your scaling models that we'll work on later. You have to pay attention to what the salaries are going to be 10 years from now. People are going to be making a lot more money that work for us now in 10 years.
Right.
So... okay, now we're going to kind of get into the boring stuff again. We talked about accounting a bunch last time. Now we're going to talk about payroll taxes and the reports. So every quarter, you have to be submitting your federal payroll reports. And then most states are also quarterly. Some states require monthly. And then you have to pay your taxes sometimes at a different rate. So we're going to talk about the taxes that are withheld and when you have to pay those. So The federal taxes consist of federal income tax that you're withholding from your employees, and then the FICA taxes. FICA taxes are Social Security and Medicare. Social Security is 6.2% withheld from the employee's check and 1.45% for Medicare. As the employer, you have to match that amount. So it just comes right off out of your pocket to match that. It's not withheld from them. So the total that's getting paid in is 15.3%, which is the self-employment tax that hits small business owners and independent contractors. So every quarter you have to file Form 941, which shows how much wages you paid and how much was withheld for federal income tax and how much was withheld for FICA, and make sure the math all works out. And then you file that form. There are a couple different pay schedules for the federal taxes. You can be a quarterly filer if you have like less than $1,000 that you owe. If you have less than $2,500 in total FICA or total 941 taxes at the end of the quarter, you can pay once a month. And if you have more than that, you have to be what's called a semi-weekly depositor, which means you have to pay every time you do payroll. So every 2 weeks when you do payroll, you have to pay the taxes ahead of time before you submit the form each time you do the payroll. The next taxes that are withheld are state taxes. So there's state income taxes in those states that have income tax. Oklahoma has it. Texas doesn't have income tax, so nothing's withheld there. And then some states have state unemployment insurance. We pay ours to the Oklahoma Employment Security Commission. There's like the Texas Workforce. And then those can either be fully paid by the company in most states. Like in Oklahoma, it's fully paid by the company. In other states, some of it can be withheld from the employee. So you have to kind of check your state laws on the unemployment to figure out whether you owe or it's withheld from the employee's check. And then the last thing to talk about for payroll taxes is the federal unemployment, which is Form 940. That's just filed once at the end of the year. It's either 0.6 or 6%, depending on whether there's a state unemployment plan. And it's capped at like the first 7,000 of payroll. So for at 0.6%, you never pay more than $42 an employee, but it kind of is what it is.
And where does that, what does that money go for?
It's for the federal unemployment insurance. I'm going to be honest with you, I really don't know.
Like how does one apply for federal unemployment?
Yeah, you just get state unemployment here. I think it's supposed to go to like creating jobs and helping people get out of unemployment, but really it's just another tax that you have to pay. So the common forms that you have to deal with are the 941, which is the quarterly federal taxes. There's also a form 944 if you have less than $1,000 per year. Like if you just have like one small employee that gets paid part-time, you can do that. Instead of doing the 941 quarterly, you do it yearly 944. And then there's the form 940, which is federal withholding, and then the state forms. And you need to get a W-4 from all your employees. That's what shows what to withhold and all that. And you give them at the end of the year a W-2.
All these numbers, you know, as I'm looking at this form 941, 944, 940, all I see is like Porsche numbers.
Yeah,
I think that's how much my eyes glaze over with paperwork. So I'm very glad to have you doing this. Yeah.
Speaking of which, there are payroll companies and payroll software that you can use. You should not be trying to do this all by hand. You should just know what the forms are and kind of generally what you're required to do as an employer. The payroll software is QuickBooks, QuickBooks Online, QuickBooks Desktop, and there's also a ton of other payroll softwares out there that just do payroll and not accounting.
I used one of those for a while, you know,
yeah.
And it's kind of a pain in the butt sometimes if you get behind or they send you a form or something like that, so you have to fill this out. And then,
yeah.
You know, so.
The payroll software, though, basically, once you get it set up, which is kind of a bear to get set up initially, but if you get QuickBooks all set up, you just enter in their hours, and then they're paid very easily. You can even set it up for direct deposit, so you don't even have to print checks. That's makes it real easy to do payroll. But there are also payroll companies that you can pay to just do it all for you. So Paycom is a big one here in Oklahoma.
Paycom Center, right?
Yeah, so. Big one in Oklahoma. There's Paychecks. There's a handful of other ones that I can't remember off the top of my head. But basically, they'll have all the HR and payroll software and everything ready to go for you. You just kind of log into a portal and you submit your employees' hours, and they take care of everything. So they can even have deals with that clock in and clock out and then do the paychecks automatically. So you don't even have to worry about it. It's definitely a great option to have a payroll company, but it can be a little bit costly.
So I'll tell you this, just the first year that I had Chester's, I feel like I got a little bit robbed on the overtime stuff,
Definitely.
And that was all just because I wasn't paying attention.
Mm-hmm.
I was just kind of being lax and letting people do it. So this is something I believe that it's really important to pay attention to, especially if you're paying hourly.
Absolutely. Yeah, you definitely want to pay attention, and you should just know generally, again, what these forms are, what they're used for, and why you have to deal with them. But you don't have to know how to do a 941 form. The software takes care of it mostly. The next thing we're going to talk about is sort of key employees. So as your business grows, you're going to have to start delegating some more important tasks, and you're going to have to hire people or promote people from within that are sort of key employees. And these people become very important to your mental well-being, pretty much. They take over a lot of the stress, a lot of the responsibilities. And if you have somebody like that in your company, you have to take care of them, because the bottom line is if they become unhappy, best case, they go work for a competitor. Worst case, you've created a competitor. They're going to go out and start their own business just like yours because they know how to do it.
So I think for employers, though, there's a fine line, between keeping someone happy and feeling extorted.
100%. Yeah, you don't ever want to pay somebody so much that it's you're not making any money. Although that will happen at the beginning of your small business. You may pay your employees more than you're making. But as you grow and you get bigger, you don't want to be extorted by your key employees. That's true.
So might it be better to plan and try to create a culture where there aren't any key employees, where everybody can do most of the tasks and you're not dependent on one person? Because the way Lulu is my key employee, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if something happens to her, we're going to be hurting quite a bit, because even if I found somebody who speaks Chinese, they're going to be ignorant of all the things that she knows.
So that's a very great point and very idealistic and something that you really should strive for. Very, very difficult to actually accomplish. When you're running a small business like this, like we have with less than 5 or 10 people, somebody steps into a role. It's impossible to pay enough people to cross-train on everything. It's very difficult. Big corporations, if you're working as a cog in the machine and you leave, they're probably not even going to notice. But as a small business, if you have 5 people, if one guy leaves, you're going to be really up the creek. So, so when you do have these key employees that are coming up, you'll identify them. They'll start taking over more of your work as your time is stretched thinner and thinner. You just have to keep them happy, and so there's a couple different things that you can do: raises, benefits, things like that. An equity share is an option, a small one. We call it sweat equity. Sometimes they'll get 5 or 10%. That's an ideal way to keep employees, but unfortunately, you do have to give up some of your company for it. So.
Well, we've talked about this before.
Mm-hmm.
When I've made it clear that for Chester's, for example, I thought, can we make it into an employee-owned company? Yeah. And we've talked about the pros and cons of that. So.
That's tough to have a bunch of employees own it. Employee-owned companies are awesome, and they can be beneficial. But the problem is that if you have a large workforce, even more than 5, and people come and they leave and they go and they quit, it's a real hassle trying to keep that up. So really just rewarding your early employees or your key employees, I think, is the ticket. And one thing on this, I have actual personal experience with this. If you start a business, like if you invest in a business or you start a business with a partner who is key to making everything function, you really need to get what's called a key man insurance policy. I had a partner pass away, unfortunately, right as we got a business going, and it was almost impossible to keep going. If I would have had the key man insurance policy, I would have been able to recoup my losses and just been done with it. But without him, the business faltered and failed very quickly.
Yeah,
so
you hear stories like that all the time.
It does
unfortunately.
happen. It does happen, yeah. If I got hit by a bus tomorrow, there'd be a lot of businesses who are struggling with their accounting. So it's good to have some type of insurance, some good backup plans if those key employees leave or quit or whatever. So
Do accountants ever make deals with each other in case something happens to take over each other's business?
It's a fine idea, and I've actually attempted that a couple times to work with other accountants to help out, but everybody's kind of out for themselves.
Real territorial.
Yeah, it's tough. You don't want people stealing clients and that kind of stuff. So,
well, I would just think it would be kind of an emergency situation.
It would be mutually beneficial. So if there's any bookkeepers near me that want to make a deal, I'm down.
Well, there you go, guys. That's a free idea from Turtlesmith.
Yeah.
There you go. Make mutually beneficial, arrangements with your colleagues. I know, for example, that a guy that we're going to get in here at some point to interview. His name is Aaron Glenn. He's nicknamed Surf. I don't know why, but he basically has a business that does storm shelters.
Oh yeah.
And safe rooms. And
big business in Oklahoma.
Yeah, and he's got a system that he created to do this that makes them stronger than anything else. So a little plug there. But the thing that I want to mention though is that he is very generous with people. He's had a couple of his employees go off and start businesses. Some of them have even, advertised against him, basically stolen jobs out from under him, by underbidding him. And despite that, he helps them out of jams, because they'll get themselves into situations where they can't complete a job, because of their inexperience or their inability to get workers. And he has stepped in many times to help them, and so that kind of mentality, I call it the abundance mentality, and that's not from me. That's from Stephen Covey from the 7 Habits of Highly Successful People.
Yep.
But the abundance mentality basically posits that there really is enough business for everyone out there.
Mostly, yeah.
And of course, that can't always be true. But in his case, he just feels like I could be a jerk and let them falter and really let them go out of business. But then I know that his family and his kids will suffer. So it doesn't really hurt me to help him. And then maybe next time he'll be a little bit nicer about, not underbidding me so severely on jobs.
It's a great thing. It really is. And I'm in full agreement with that. Some of your employees, if you are successful and have a long-standing business, eventually somebody's going to leave, start a competitive business. And I agree with that mentality. I think the best thing that you can do is just wish them well and be happy to help them on their journey. One of my very first bosses and kind of early mentors, a guy named Leon Hicks. He's great. He told me when I first started working there, he goes, I know that you're not going to stay with me for 5 or 10 years. This is a short-term gig, couple years for you, and then you're going to move on to bigger and better things. So he just asked me very nicely, just try to help me out when we're transitioning, and if I need some help later on after you're gone, please be there for us, and, don't screw me over. And I said, no problem. And to this day, I still talk to him and help him out when he needs it. So that kind of boss mentality of nurturing your employees and hoping that they go on to bigger and better things, I think is great.
I've actually seen it a couple times where the original company that a person works for, they will actually invest in employees and set them up in business.
Yep. Maybe
not directly, in competing in the same area, but they'll say, yeah, you want to go a town over and we'll get you going. We'll get you the truck. We'll, they already know you're a good plumber, so we'll set you up. We'll invest in it. We'll take a little piece of what you're doing. And I think that's a good way too.
That's exactly what we talked about with a little bit of an equity share. Instead of giving them a piece of their main company, they just started another one, but that they now get to be partners in. So they get to benefit from that competition. So I think that's a great thing for key employees.
Yeah, and it's it's just a what do they call it? A virtuous circle.
Yeah. Well, the last thing I want to talk about in regards to employment is just being realistic in your expectations. I find that a lot of bosses think that their employees should work as hard as them, and they should really, bust ass every single day and stress about the business as much as they do, and that's never going to happen. It's not a realistic expectation. Your employees don't care about your business as much as you do, and that's okay.
Yeah, I had that expectation for, a very short time.
Yeah.
I just thought that they would see the value in what I'm doing and they're going to care about it as much as me. And, sometimes employees will come in and they'll be a little bit idealistic and they will, indicate that they do care like that. But really it fades because they don't own it. They're not seeing the fruit of the labor in the sense that they feel an ownership stake in the business.
Right.
That said, there are employees that work and act like owners, and they are the unicorn. So if you get a hold of one of them,
don't let them go.
Do everything on this list to keep them.
Yeah.
But yeah, most people don't do that. I actually had back in 25 years ago or so, when with my first company, I had another company approach me, and they told me their pitch to me was, sell us the cases at wholesale, and we will do the shows. We will represent ourselves as you, and you will never have to worry about the long hours of a show or all the hassle of it and everything. We'll do it for you. And I thought to myself, I said, this person will never sell this case or represent this case with the same amount of love that I will, because he didn't build it. He didn't.
Right.
He doesn't know what went into it. He didn't sleep on the leather, and it's just like it's an almost impossibility to feel that reverence for the product if you're coming in afterward.
Yeah. Yeah.
So be careful of people who pretend like they care about your product just to get a piece of your product. Is what I would say on that. So that's something you'll see a lot of. You'll see employees come in. You'll see people come in. I'm just referencing myself. I see people come in, and before you and I, got together and we started actually looking at resumes and kind of, evaluating that, I was really, really guilty of just, taking every warm body that came in and gave me a hug.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody that just said, "Oh, I love what you're doing. I love your product. Great, you're hired." And that is absolutely the worst way to do it.
Well, you want to find people that are passionate about what you're doing, because then it makes working with them a little bit easier. But at no point will anybody that you hire, except for maybe Lulu, if you have a wife that works with you, but at no point will anyone care about it as much as you. And that's just the bottom line.
Yeah. I mean, we shouldn't say that it will never happen, but it's very rare.
Okay. Fair enough.
Right. And when it does happen, though, there's a flip side, right, where we talk about key employees, right?
Mm-hmm.
They make themselves into a key employee because they care so much.
Mm-hmm.
And then if they are not taken care of, there comes a point where the owner makes a decision or says something offhand or whatever that lets them know that they are just an employee. And that can be very hurtful for them, so that can sour the relationship. So you got to be very careful of that.
Yeah. Yeah, well, employee kind of morale is one of the things I wanted to talk about. It's so important that your employees come to work and they're happy and they're excited to be there. Like I said, they're never going to be as passionate as you, but they can be happy to be there and have a good working environment. And so you really want to try to set that up. Do not be, I like to say that there's a difference between a boss and a leader. You really want to be a leader. You want to be somebody who's working right next to your employees. You're the first one to show up, the last one to leave, and you're really putting in all of the effort, leading by example. If you are trying to show up late, and messing around and you don't really want to work as hard as even your employees, or you're expecting them to do all of the work for you, it's just a recipe for disaster. So don't be a jerk boss that your employees hate. Within reason, try to be as nice as possible. Can I show up late if I bring ice cream? Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. But again, you also don't want to be taken advantage of, like you talked about before, so people are quick to take advantage if you're too nice. They see it as weakness. So it's important to kind of walk that fine line.
So Ben Franklin wrote a book and he often used Poor Richard's almanac, so Poor Richard as a kind of an author, to things. So he wrote a book called The Way to Wealth. It's a very small book. It's only like 20 pages. But one of the things he says in that book is he says, that, and this, he used the terms master and servant, so I don't know if he meant, I think he meant servant in terms of indentured servitude.
Yeah.
Because it was in Philadelphia. But basically what he said was, is that a master that takes his eye off of what his servant is doing deserves, the negative consequences that come with that. I was wanting to quote it, but I kind of forgot the exact quote. But it was basically mind your business. Like if you're the master, and just as you said, if you're not paying attention, then a lot of times employees will start taking advantage, or they won't, or they may even be trying to do it right, but without instruction or without proper guidance and course correction, they can take your business into a place that it doesn't need to be, even with good intentions. So.
Fair enough. Well, any further thoughts on employees or any questions on the forums? Everything will be available on
Yeah, I
Turtlesmith.
just, my thoughts are just as I said, when you're in business, it's really tempting to hire your friends. It's tempting to hire your acquaintances. It's tempting to hire your relationships, not your relationships, but your relatives. So if you value those relationships, if you value those friendships, then you need to be very, very strong and mindful of how you're coming across, so you don't destroy those relationships, because they can go pretty bad pretty quickly, because you at least in my case, a lot of the times I didn't feel like I could be as critical as I needed to be. I didn't feel like I could be as corrective as I needed to be, because someone was my friend, before I hired them.
I think a good rule of thumb is don't hire anyone that's going to be difficult to fire.
That's fair enough. That's a good adage right there. Says it very succinctly.
Yeah. It's hard to fire a friend and girlfriend. So, anyway, well, that's the end of this segment.
Yeah, I have nothing else on that.
Break time. This podcast is brought to you by S&H Business Services. We are serving the OKC and greater Oklahoma area. We offer tax preparation, accounting, bookkeeping, and payroll services for small businesses and individuals. You can find us at shbusinessservices.com. Again, that's S&H Business Services, found at shbusinessservices.com. Well, our next segment, we're going to talk about something that is unavoidable for small businesses, and that's social media. You got to have all the social media accounts. You got to be easily findable by your consumers. And I think you have a lot of strong opinions about social media.
I do have very strong opinions about social media.
So are we about to expect some rants here?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah, you're definitely about to expect some rants.
Well, first off, how have you been doing on your social media? I've heard cutting the Facebook out.
Well, I tried to.
Yeah, so it didn't work.
I have backslid on that. For a week, I was somewhat blissful, where I did not have Facebook on my phone. But Facebook is worse than heroin, because it will not leave me alone.
Yeah, just keeps coming after you.
Well, here's why. It's hard to do business on Facebook and not actually be on Facebook, So if you intend to not just be a business presence on Facebook, so I have my personality is, I did it wrong when I started on Facebook. So what I did is I set up my personal account, and I used that personal account to pretty much promote my cases almost always. And then, I started to see people posting things that, on social topics and social issues, so I felt like I had something to say about it. And then I started, giving my opinion about these things based on my experience and my views. So now it's so intertwined, right, that I have almost 5,000 followers. At one point I had 5,000 followers, plus I had another 1,000 people waiting in line to get in, but Facebook cuts it off at 5,000, right? So now it's down to like 4,800, because people have decided, so a couple hundred people have decided that they don't want to be my friend on Facebook or follow me because of my views on topics that don't agree with theirs.
Yeah.
So I still got like 4,800 people. But if I had to do it over, then I would definitely keep things separate. I would make a business-only side of it. And currently my business pages on Facebook are business only. So there are never any comment on those pages about anything but cases and pool-related stuff sometimes. But I don't even let those pages be used for like a discussion on pool or pool-related topics or anything like that. Just once in a while, I'll have some praise for something that went on in the pool world, but I won't get involved on the page in any of the drama that goes on in the pool world. So as to say JB Cases itself doesn't really take a side.
So JB Cases is Switzerland, but John Barton's not.
John Barton is definitely not Switzerland.
I do my best to kind of remain neutral on most stuff. I don't have a real big personal social media presence. I lurk on Reddit sometimes, but that's about it.
So the thing is, I know that the conventional wisdom is that business people should, never discuss politics or social issues on social media.
Which I'm in full agreement of.
Right.
I think that's a fine thing to do. Keep your business and personal life completely separate.
And there is a ton of merit for that, right? And at the end of the day, that's probably, a much more peaceful way to live.
Yeah.
On the other hand, though, I feel like that especially small business people, they are people who live in the community. It's different when you're like a CEO of a Fortune 500 company. You're up in this rarefied air up there, and ordinary people don't get to really converse with you that much. Now, I do know that once in a while they'll make statements, that get them in trouble one way or the other, or they'll allow their company to take a stance or something that reflects back on them. But I firmly believe, that if we want small business people to be part of the community, we want their support. I get asked all the time, right, for donations to people's medical bills, to their house burned down, to their league teams, right, stuff like that. I imagine a lot of other people get asked for donations for Little League and basketball, and so basically they want small business owners to be a part of the community.
Yes. But
then on the other hand, they don't want small business owners to voice their opinions about topics that affect the community, social issues or political issues or things like that. And I don't think that's right. And
fair enough, but it can sure get you in some sticky water or sticky situations, and then you end up with people who end up hating your company and they don't spend money just because they don't like your views.
So here's what I've learned on this. And everybody keep in mind, this is just my personal experience, but keep in mind, I've been doing this for 35 years. So I've been on the internet since 1995. I was on when it was dial-up. So and I've been on message boards since about 1997, not general message boards. When I first started out, it was just pool message boards that I was on. I didn't seek out anything else, so I didn't talk politics. I was very, very apathetic about politics. I didn't really.
In '97, you were doing this?
Yeah, but I didn't care. I didn't vote.
I was learning how to type because I was 10 years old.
Yeah, no, there you go. So 90. So there's our difference in ages. But what I want to say is that I looked at the internet when it first came out, when I first noticed it and got on there. I looked at it as this wonderful thing for humanity, right?
Yeah.
Now, keep in mind, I was a reader as a kid. Anytime you saw me, if I wasn't riding my bike, my nose was in a book, and I did adult things. I played games with adults, So I feel like I got a grounding and a little bit higher level of thinking, as a kid. So when I was 10 or 12 years old, I was playing Risk and things like that with the adult group that used to meet and play, and they would let me play because I understood the game and I played right. So when the internet came around, right, I was like, this is wonderful, right? I can find out anything, I can research things, I can discuss things I can promote my product, right, and I can get advice and I can give advice. And so I signed up for leatherworking groups forums, and I signed up for pool and billiard forums.
Yeah, which still exists and are a great resource for small businesses.
Yeah, so come to find out, that there exists a class of people called trolls, and their whole purpose in life, they've made their purpose in life is to see how angry they can get someone else to get. And on top of these individuals who do this, there's actually online communities that compare, how much they can get someone to go off, or how viral they can get something to go, trolling the internet. So basically what I'm saying there is that this wonderful thing that I looked at the internet as this wonderful worldwide library of information that we can all share and come together. Well, there's a bunch of anarchists that run around with lighters trying to burn it down.
Yeah.
And, making it a big trash pile. So, very quickly I got sucked into that dynamic, where anybody could troll me. And then you have the people who are sincerely wanting to argue with you. They have a point to make. They think that whatever you're saying is, if I say, well, JB cases are great, they say, well, how can you say that? You're just, you're the one selling them. Obviously, you're going to say they're great. They're probably shit, and why should anybody believe you? You're probably a liar.
I just feel like for a small business owner, there's no victory to be had. Whether you're dealing with a troll or somebody who genuinely wants to argue the point with you, you're never going to change that person's mind. When you do kind of your employee handbook, which is something that you'll have to do alongside your other manuals you have, it is good to have a nice little social media clause in there. We'll have one for you on turtlesmith.com. I find I can't really decide the best way to word that. We use basic standard ones for our employee handbook, but there is freedom of speech, so allowing your employees a little bit of leeway as long as they're not being crazy, I think is the way to go. But as an employee, if you're applying for a job, make sure you scrub your social media. You want to make sure you get a job.
That's a very valid point. I think if I had to really think about it, one thing I might say to an employee, I might say, look, if you feel like that you want to be someone who is volatile and argues in ways that are less than socially acceptable, maybe don't promote that you work here.
Yeah.
And not necessarily because we are embarrassed that you work here. It's just so that conversation doesn't have to happen, right? It's like I've had people in between my two companies. I went to work for one of my former customers, and I literally had people like sending emails to my boss trying to get me fired. Now, my boss is even cooler than me when it comes to this stuff, and he's even more along the lines of freedom of speech and standing up for what's right.
Yeah.
And the emails that he would send back to these people were just, I can't imagine that they ever wanted to type anything on the internet again, because he's way smarter than me.
Yeah.
And way better at wordplay, and he just eviscerated people.
Well, there you go.
In the nicest possible way, which made it even worse.
Yeah. This podcast is brought to you by S&H Business Services. We are serving the OKC and greater Oklahoma area. We offer tax preparation, accounting, bookkeeping, and payroll services for small businesses and individuals. You can find us at shbusinessservices.com. Again, that's S&H Business Services, found at shbusinessservices.com. Well, I guess we should kind of finish this up with our closing topic, which is lucky breaks in business. You talked about that a couple times. What's a big lucky break for you? You got a story?
Well, I've been talking pretty much nonstop for half an hour, so let's hear your lucky break first.
It doesn't matter how you got rich or how you built your business or how you made money in life. There's a time where you do just get a little lucky. So for me, my business was going okay when I first started. I built it up over a couple years. I had a nice client base, and then COVID hit, and it was just a disaster. And right as COVID hit, I lost about half my clients, and through 2020, I was really struggling. And then in 2021, I revamped some of my advertising, and the OMMA posted all the emails for every medical marijuana grower and processor and dispensary that you could just go get it. And so I just did a huge email blast. I probably shouldn't have. It was probably annoying to a lot of people, but that really changed my whole business around. We tripled in size of clients, and we have just a ludicrous amount of marijuana clients, and the complexities around 280E and the marijuana tax laws are vast enough that most CPAs and most other tax accountants don't want to do it. And me being willing to do it, that was a huge lucky break for me. All the businesses, having the access to their emails and being able to talk to the business owners directly, it saved my business. That's why I'm here today. So.
I tell you what, that is actually a great story, and I don't publish lists of my dealers online because I did that in my first company, and I realized that my competitors were using my list of dealers as a qualified list. They were like, okay, these people are already willing to buy, expensive cases and put them in their stores, so let me just advertise to them off of John's list.
Yeah.
So that's why I don't do it anymore. But I can see exactly how that would work out for you. So that's great.
I sent like 12,000 emails. Now I got about what we had talked about in our cold email response. I got about a 1% callback. So about out of 12,000, I got 120 emails back, and we were able to secure about 30 of those clients, and it changed my whole business. So,
that's amazing, dude.
Yeah.
I think that's great. And not only that. That's also an example of recognizing opportunity.
Yeah, for sure. But had they not posted all those or they kept them secret, man, I would have limped along for another couple of years. But that really helped me out, and it exploded my business. So
that's awesome. Well, I'm going to say that my lucky break was meeting my wife. The girl who eventually became my wife. Like, I tell this story all the time, but when I went to work for my former customer, one of the things they did was they sent me to China to source products and to do quality control and to build websites. So that was my three main pillars of work. And the building the websites part saw me having to go to a big internet company. I had like 50 people working for me. They were working for my company. We hired them, but every single day at 5:00, they were done, right? Like nobody at 5:01, there was nobody on that floor. So that was also peak traffic time, right? So my driver, he didn't want to come and get me, and where I was living at the time was about 30 miles away from this place.
Yeah.
So I would just walk around. I would just take an hour or two and just explore, and then when I wanted to call him, I'd call him and he'd come get me, and he'd be happy because he didn't have to fight all the traffic. So every single day, for a month, I would just start out walking and I'd go in a different direction.
Yeah.
And I lost weight, and it was great. And one day I just come to another intersection, and I turn right instead of left, and the next intersection I turn left instead of right, and I end up right in front of this bar, and I'm thirsty, so I go in. The owner is Swedish. His wife is Chinese, so I figured I'll hang out here, and then the driver she can help me call the driver when it's ready. Turns out that some rich American guy who owns a company is having his birthday party there, and he's made it free liquor, open bar, everybody's invited, so sure, why not? And my wife's aunt brought her to this place because she's friends with the owner's wife. And she wants her niece to maybe meet a foreigner because she herself is married to a foreigner. And my wife is someone who never goes to bars. She's not, in China and Asian countries, sometimes you'll go to bars and there's women who specifically hang out in bars trying to trap a foreigner. Mm-hmm. They don't care anything about the person. They just want to get somebody who's getting a paycheck.
Yeah. That's
not my wife. She had no interest in that. She had her own career. She's a university teacher, counselor. And so, but I'm full of liquid courage at this point. Her aunt is, she's kind of 2 people away from me, so her aunt looks over to me and she's like, hey, you want to meet my niece? And I'm like, sure, and I like to dance. So, she's a dancer. She's a semi-professional dancer. So we go out and dance a little bit, and we communicate and we give each other the standard, line in China, which is, I want to learn Chinese, will you help me? And she's like, well, I want to learn English. Will you help me? Right?
Yeah.
And then I proceed to get much more wasted. I find myself at 3 or 4 in the morning at some street food place, right? This is like, I'm in China like a month, right? So I haven't really had any street food or anything. So I get deadly sick, right? Because
okay.
all the foreigners get sick, because it's different viruses and different things like that, and it's food poisoning basically, until your body gets used to it. So I spend the whole Saturday just throwing up, and at one point, I call one of my few friends that I had made there, and he gets me to the hospital, and I'm on an IV for 4 hours. And the next day I get a text, and it says, hey, the teacher is ready. Where is the student?
Oh, nice.
And her aunt made her send the text. She wasn't going to text me.
She wasn't?
And I absolutely forgot her. Like, I didn't even know her name when I got the text. I was like, what's this? And
well, that's a lucky break.
Absolutely it is. It's serendipity, because she turned out to be a very deep well and a fantastic human and the best business partner that anyone on earth could ever wish for. She is literally the yin to my yang.
Yeah, we joke around here that she's really the brains of that outfit.
Of course she is. I bring the ideas, but I don't remember who said it. But somebody said, there's nothing in the world that's cheaper than a good idea with no action.
Yeah.
And that's all I am, is good ideas with no action, unless I have somebody to help me bring it to life, So that was a lucky break that, she became my first really great team member. And with her, we've been able to put together an amazing team. And without those people, you and I literally wouldn't be sitting here doing this.
Nope. Well, that's a lucky break for all of us, I think. So. All right. Well, anything else, man, or should we wrap
Nothing
it up?
else, man. I think I got a lot off my chest, I think.
I feel like that was
that was really therapeutic.
Yeah.
I feel like I should pay you.
Yeah, maybe so. All right, man. We'll see you next week.
All right. You guys have a good one.